So I actually do want to keep it kind of brief. I know I'm keeping you I'm keeping you from whatever it is. No. But I think partly because I think it'd be easier to explain what we do and why we do it in a discussion and question and answer. So I'm going to hopefully, not run it too fast, but there'll be a lot of missing pieces, and I hope you will ask me. First of all, I won't give you the background. Okay, I will give you a little bit of background. I did run social services for about 20 years. I was very disappointed with my work, even though Clinton seemed to think it was cool. I actually my mother was Mexican. I'll explain my name some other time. And you can, in the meantime, be reading stuff, because I'm not going to read this stuff to you. My mother's Mexican, single mom, moved my sister and I to San Jose, California to build a better life, the American dream. Within a year, lost my sister to an abusive man. Decided that could never happen again. Decided she would focus on me. She sacrificed everything, including her health, to get me to UC Berkeley for an engineering degree so I could take care of my sister. She then took her own life so that I would not spend money and energy to take care of her and her operations that she needed, and I could focus on my sister. And off of that, since you said what's the basis of this, is that I left engineering and I wanted to be doing design, and I felt that if there was a war on poverty, certainly there could have been something done that I wouldn't lose my mother and my sister into these situations, and then another generation that was coming up. So that was the purpose of my going into it. Then I told you, 20 years into doing social services, community development, and getting a lot of recognition, I thought, I'm seeing kids I first saw show up. They had kids. Now some of their kids are showing up, but they're losing a kid like my mother lost a kid, and losing any kid is not good in a family. So it's like, if that's all I'm doing is just replicating what happened to my mother, then I can't be in social services. So my mother, and what you'll hear from me is really about, and what I know more, and I've researched, is kind of families in these two quintiles, okay? And it's about 35 million households, probably over 100 million of our population, adults and children. And this is where, my mother and I and my sister lived. This is where my mother wanted me to really be, different. Somebody make it. My sister would kind of swirl back in and out of this as her husband would beat her up, and other stuff like that would happen. And what I knew in social services is that the same thing happened to other families. Now, one of the other things that happened with my mother, she was very determined, and you'll hear a lot about my mother, so it shaped a lot of my thought on this whole thing, is that she knew that there was charity and there was church and there was a welfare system, and she would not go into it. And partly the reason why she'd never got health care. She would not take jobs that had health care because they would pay more. And what she needed was money to save to send me to college. And she wouldn't go into here because it would take her pride away, is what she would say. And she worked extremely hard. She'd work 2 jobs. She'd do anything that had to happen. And somehow or other, then my sister would run away from this guy that would beat her up with her 3 kids, end up on welfare because she had to. She was in crisis. She just got beat up. And so the welfare system was really important. I knew it was important. It saved my sister a number of times during crisis. But as soon as my sister started getting a job, she would lose her child care, she would lose her food stamps. And so then she was back with this guy again who'd promised never to beat her up, and he loved her and all the kind of whatever. So there was something wrong intuitively to this system to me because of the way I was going and the experiences in my family. Then somewhere along the line, I became middle income. And I started becoming more towards over here, and then I got this crazy MacArthur. So then all of a sudden, I had to get a financial planner. And it was fascinating because all of a sudden, it was like, there's all these choices and all these options and whatever. And it was something like, God, people in middle and upper income, and especially as you start getting more to the upper middle, live a very different life, a very different world. Options are there, and you're seen in a very different way. My mother would not go into here because it would portray her as helpless, that she didn't work hard, that she needed all this stuff. But when I'm over here, it's like, no, you can rip off a bunch of folks and whatever, but you're upper income, you're still okay. We're going to feed you if you have an idea, whatever. You graduate out of Stanford, all these people kind of decide that they can invest $2 million in you or something because you got a crazy idea. But in this world, it just doesn't exist. So what was missing? So what would happen? Well, I knew my mother was, she was talented, she was a designer, and I knew that she should be invested in. But there was no way for her to get the information about her talents and what she could do and how hard she worked. Because the only thing that the programs would ask and the social workers would ask is how needy you are. The more needy you were, the more they were important in your life. And so it just became a really big problem. She wanted to tell people how hard she worked and whatever, but there was no way to actually get that. And so the work at FII is really to surface, what are the indicators that show that families are reliable, they're resourceful? Because right now the stereotype is that they're dependent, 47% of us, that Gingrich was that they don't even know how to work 8 hours a day. But then on the other side of the political spectrum, it's like, well, feel sorry for them. That if we get them a social worker and if we help them, if we create another program, then they'll be okay. But both of those carry the stereotype that they can't do it themselves. And my mother could have done it herself. My sister could have done it herself. So the issue then became of how do you get access to resources? How do you change that stereotype? And in many ways, this isn't about a program. This is really about changing attitudes in this country. Because, as long as people think that low-income folks and working poor do not really work hard and don't know what to do, we will never recognize the talent that my family had. And so a lot of what we're doing is really trying to develop a set of resources that are going to be available to families based on initiative, based on hard work, based on character, all of those types of things that when my mother came here, it was because there's this image of America and you work really hard and you're in this community, and if you have a good reputation, then people will invest in you, right? So that's what we kind of went back to. Most of you, I think, are here because you want to do good. You know about data. God, you know a lot more about data than I know about data. I was an engineer, so I like data. And one of the problems that we have is, again, that we are not capturing, I think, the right data about families. I think people that want to be helpful don't really understand most of the families that are low income and what their life situation is, and that they really can and should make their own choices. The big piece in terms of what I want to talk to you about is how important data is to the families themselves. And I think with some people I talked about Weight Watchers and Mint, and there's a lot of software where if you start seeing the data, then you start doing better. And when I first started this project, I was collecting data from families on a monthly basis online. I'd give everybody a computer, and they would report to me monthly what they were doing. There's about 200 data points, right? What changed in your life? And I felt like I had to pay them for them to spend that time. Well, as it turned out, they start saying, seeing my charts and seeing what I'm doing, my debt's going down, my income's going up, but maybe I need to work on my kids and whatever. And they start saying how important the data was. And then when they start learning from other families, it became even more important. So here's the situation. Right now, we have a system, and I go to a lot of conferences, where the funders and policymakers, first of all, they'll talk to each other, okay? It's kind of this, okay? Sorry. Then there's these other conferences. There's not a lot of service providers here, right? But then the other conferences are where they have the service providers. And you talk to each other, and the foundations will ask the providers, like, so what's wrong with those people? What could we do to help them, et cetera, et cetera. And you design things, and then they implement it. And then evaluations come to see how that implementation works. Well, imagine if it was different. What if you started that the families needed the information? So you start with my mother, sorry. So that she really needed this information, right? And that her friends needed this information. And that in that feedback loop, that actually she was going to be able to do better. In particular, if she's surrounded by her family and community and whatever. And this is the way, when I was looking at how America built its reputation about, how people got out of poverty, it was that they worked together. Your reputation, you were Irish, you were Polish, but your reputation in that neighborhood, whatever, would let you borrow money. Those were the kinds of things. And that if you had an idea and, or you got a job, some Polish guy got a job in a meat factory, and then he would recommend his friends. And so the social network piece was always huge. So what if you had that? And what if then these families were able to rate the stuff that we produce for them to try to help them, right? Imagine then what we could do. All of a sudden, things could be better for the families, because we would understand where the demand is, where the initiative is, and whatever. And I see so much money and so much energy wasted of well, I went to Cal, so I could kind of dump on Stanford. Some kid out of Stanford comes, and they have this great idea, and it sounds very logical, and they have a rich friend that knows a foundation president, and it's like they get funded, right? And they go roll it out and whatever, and 3 years later, it's like, well, what got accomplished? Well, the fact is that we rarely talk to families. We rarely encourage families to talk to each other. We certainly don't collect data, and the data we collect on families is generally needs data. How needy are you? Not what talent you have, because that makes us superfluous. Then we're not in the lead. And it becomes really difficult in a social service network where a lot of people, even leaving private sector, come to the nonprofit sector because they have an idea and they want to implement it. And that power situation, and this issue of power is huge, that just social status itself, then when you're in that power position and you have an idea, you outpower the parent. I can't tell you how many teenagers get into gangs because they know that their parent is really not powerful. Their parent is not going to be able to do anything. My mother was fighting that all the time. And I had one mother that I was sending a social worker to, and she pulled me aside one time and says, don't ever have your social worker come to my house in front of my kids anymore. They're losing respect for me. Because she didn't have the resources. It wasn't that she didn't have the smarts, she didn't have the resources. So those are the kinds of situations. This is the reality for us right now in terms of those loops that I gave you, is that we've been using an online data tracking system for families. They each get a computer. They each report monthly. So they do this monthly journal. And out of that, obviously, we can do an analysis. And most of and I'll show you some of the indicators and stuff. What we track are, in particular, initiative items. So families, often social workers would say, tell me what your goals are and tell me what your plan is to implement your goals, and that all seems really right. Well, the fact is my nephew, who was the one born, anyway, so his life is pretty hard, would have all kinds of goals, but to be honest with you, they weren't realistic. So it's like, people will say what they think you want to hear. And so for us, a lot of the data is to capture what people do. It actually is, okay, so you want to be a nurse, so then what have you done for it? And until they actually take some action in that, they have some skin in the game or something, right? Then we're not there. But if they start moving in a certain direction, which is what we can catch trends, if they start moving in a certain direction, then what we've learned is the resources are not there when they need them. I need a scholarship now. My car just broke down now. My 16-year-old is in trouble now. You and I would buy that service. You and I would buy that access. They don't have that ability. And they can't get into the nonprofit sector services, even though they're set up, at the timing. So control and choice for us is huge. This is the whole thing. And that what we need is a responsive set of funders and services so that people, once they start down a path, and I can tell you 97% of them start down a path. It isn't that dependent thing. So once they start down that path, they don't keep hitting these walls and ceilings. But for us to understand that, we need data. We need actually short feedback loops. Right? This isn't a matter of rolling out a program for 3 years. But if you can see what's going on in a neighborhood, and you can see the families that are all starting businesses, and you'll see some of the outcomes. Hope you're reading some of this. And this is much heavier. So one of the things that I find really fascinating is that when I first started in Boston, and actually in San Francisco too, what we were able to identify is there were 3 lending circles. And lending circles, I think most people know, it's basically a very traditional form of people putting together. Okay, so people putting money together, and then they take turns borrowing or using it. And we started with 3 groups. So we enroll families in cohorts. I'm not explaining a lot about FI, but we enroll them in cohorts with their friends so that that's who they turn to. They can't turn to my staff because I fire my staff if they give them any direction. But they turn to their friends. And while we started with 3 groups that did these lending circles, within 2 years, we're up at 21 groups. And if you annualize how much they're putting into this thing, it's $750,000. This is how the Vietnamese did it. This is how these microeconomies work. When they start seeing that it'll pay, they start doing it. And the fact is that what happened in Boston was started because of the families in San Francisco. And the way that communication happened is through social media, so that they start seeing what the other families were doing. So if you went back to the system, you'll notice that besides the consumer feedback piece and the monthly journaling, there's a social media site so that you can share with other families. You can tell them, I bought a house, other people can buy a house. I'll help you buy a house. Kiva, they can access Kiva Zip, which is starting in national work, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're looking for is other resources that the families need at the timing that they might need it, and to then have the data so that if a funder or whatever is interested in education, they can make scholarships available at the right time. So it's more demand driven, which is the way it works for you and I. That's what we expect. We expect the system to react to us and what we need. And the system we're really changing to right now is actually operated through a company called InvestCloud. It is cloud-based real-time. The families are going to be able to input their data. They're going to be able to see what other families are doing, what their family is doing. They're going to be able to manipulate it, just like you manipulate sorting and whatever in Excel. They'll be able to connect. We'll be able to bring census data into it. We'll be able to do analysis. And that's where both it'd be useful to the families and to us and to policymakers. So this is some of the stuff that's been going on. These are some of the data that we collect. Everything doesn't change in a family's life every month, so it takes them 20 minutes to a half hour. But like I said, what we had been doing is paying them for the time to produce the data. Now what we're doing is actually cutting back the payments with supply demand. How much do I have to give in order to get the information I want? And now as we give them access to resources, so like as we are a trustee with Kiva Zip, then we can cut back the payment, right? So it's how useful. And for us, it's really like a business. If you're useful to folks, then they'll give you what you need. So we need data. So we can see data. For us, the big picture would be in a neighborhood and what's going on. And then from that, we'll be able to understand the trends and be able to know what we can do, what is needed. And we're going pretty deep in Boston and in Oakland to try to get enough families to actually see these trends in a little bigger fashion. So that's kind of it. Because I want to leave time. You gave me the signal. Well, no, actually, I wouldn't mind stopping because I think in question and answer might be better. Right? Okay. So I threw most of So I threw mostly the data stuff. Like I said, our mission is really about changing attitudes in this country by giving this country the information as to how amazing these people are, how hard they work, all the ideas they have. And if we can sell that to the country, this country needs to, and businesses and investors need to invest in them. Okay, so.
People who are empowered by their own data, to your point, are empowered. They're not kind of told from on high, which I like. But also, your outcomes are remarkable. And I don't know if you have that on your slides, but I think that might be worth just throwing up there.
Yeah, I can show you some of that. Now, the outcomes...
Or just talking about it.
Yeah, the way they're measured, by the social sector and even by funders and stuff is kind of like this bottom piece, right? Really what we've come to, and your staff was talking about how are you going to define poverty and people being, for us it's really the measure of control and choice and sense of community, because community is what keeps you together. And we actually are trying to find survey questions to try to get a baseline on that and see that growth and control. And if we, as a society, are providing them the choices so they can actually take control of their life. Because if you limit their choices, they don't have that much control over their life. So that's the direction we're trying to move at this point in time.
You mentioned different communities that have done this really well, just on their own. Have you sort of studied and shared what it is about those communities that really works, and is there any way to port some of that stuff across?
Yeah, and
that's able?
Yes. I went into Boston and I was sitting with the funders and policy people around Boston, whether we were going to come in or not, and they were explaining, like in Grove Hall, 50% of the kids don't graduate. Everybody's afraid of the police. There's no infrastructure. All this terrible stuff, right? And so then it leads you to try to figure out how to deal with the police and I'm over there, wait. So you're telling me there's all this stuff, but 50% are graduating? Maybe we should talk to them. Same folks, but they figured out a way to get their kids to graduate. I mean, so for us, it's like, yeah, at least half of this population has figured out something to do. Do we have data on them? No, because we're a charitable country. You know, and yet it's a capitalist country. It's about entrepreneurship and whatever. But we, you know, when we start thinking of quote, low-income families, we think about them as different. Don't you want to go where there's good ideas? That's what we need to track. And then what's interesting is those people, that 50%, are willing to help the other 50% because it's their neighbors. You don't have to send a bunch of social workers. The one story I will share, which was behavior change, and that's why, like any of you that does work around behavioral stuff, you know, that's really what we are. We set up an environment that people challenge themselves and each other and help one another. That's what we did. That's, you know, that was the main thing that we did. The one story that I learned a lot from was in the first year, we were working with Salvadoran refugees that were sending all of their savings, anything they could save, back to El Salvador. And I asked them, what happens if we get sick and whatever? Well, we want to go back, right? And then about 6 or 7 months into the project, this one family, nondescript, almost never said anything, not a leader, said they're going to buy a house. And my staff is there, how are you going to do that? You have no savings. I said, well, this real estate agent said he could help us get the house at the end of the block. My friends are all going to come. We're going to get this house. And then, probably fairly quickly into it, as my staff comes back to me and says, we think it's a predatory lender. He's the real estate agent and the broker, and he's asking for fees, and can we talk to them? They need financial planning, and I'm over there, no. This project was started with help from Jerry Brown, and I promised him that we'd get clean data about what the family's capacity was to help themselves and each other. And if I threw in any of my staff's opinion, it just clouds the data. Some of them, no, you can't, but they're going to lose the house. Sure enough, they closed on it. The mortgage payments were 65% of their income. My staff comes back, they're going to lose the house. And I look at this, yeah, they're going to lose the house. And my staff is kind of pissed at me, right? So it's like, well, my mother made a mistake too, but maybe the rest of the community is not going to make the same mistake. Next thing that happened is, all those people that helped them with the deposit, descended on this house, repainted, re-landscaped it, retiled the thing, got the value up. They refinanced 6 months later with me sitting in on the refinance, got their payments down around 40%. And with this group of families surrounding this house, there's no way they're going to lose that house, right? They solved it themselves. The more amazing thing was that because this nondescript family figured out how to do it themselves, the other 5 families in the cohort within a year and a half owned homes. They all then just shifted their behavior and their expectations of assets in America because of that one family. And then the next thing that happened is that their wider roll of friends start changing their behavior. If I had saved that one family, it would have never happened. Yeah, oh good, you're gonna do it.
So I wonder to what extent you're using these sort of experimental methods that we heard about earlier today to sort of have some control families. Do you do that? Is that part of your?
No, actually, I don't know who I was talking to about that. I talked to ABT and I talked to MDRC, and several problems happened. One is I hate control groups. It's not like I went in with a good attitude. But my funders kept asking about that. And so one of the difficulties is that I didn't mention in San Francisco we started with 16 households. We then told those 16 that they could nominate other people to come in. Within 6 months we had 300 families from the same neighborhoods showing up to enroll, all word of mouth. So the fact is that this is all about a sense, an attitude, a sense of behavior, and that spills over from your friendships and whatever. It wasn't a service, it's not inoculation, So because it's not that, because it's viral in terms of the attitude, it's really an attitude, I could do this, then what MDRC was saying is, well, it's hard to pull a control group because they're influenced by the fact that they know some of these other folks and they heard of it. So they went through 3 different churches all of a sudden, right? So then they start talking about, can we do comparison groups? Well, the problem was that you have to find another city that has an economy that's really similar, so that isn't being clouded by that whole thing. So one way or another, it's like, do I really care? These families are doing really well. They're part of a marketplace. This is not an anti-poverty program. This is really about trying to make opportunity available to low-income families in the way you and I get that opportunity. And in it, if we think it's right, let's let them do that.
So I was just going to say, Mauricio, Maurice, because we know you a little bit. You all just came through an evaluation, which people have their points of view on evaluation. But will you share some of the results of that? It's not an anti-poverty program, and yet some of the data about the family's abilities to compel themselves out of poverty was pretty impressive. So can you share some of that data?
Yeah, well, the data, it's what they were able to do is that we collect data on a monthly basis and we see trend charts and whatever. So we had a lot of this data actually we see, and charted out on a fairly long basis. So the evaluator went in and tried to validate whether these things were actually going on or if families are cheating. We actually audit the data every 3 months. They have to show us report cards, they have to show us pay stubs, whatever they've, we audit that. And so again, the evaluator had to say, well, are we actually doing that and whatever. And so a lot of the figures really are things that the evaluator didn't have to get separately. Like when I had evaluations when I ran social services, it cost a ton of money to send, social workers out to get the data, et cetera, et cetera. But what the evaluator was also interested in is, so why did these people do this? Because you didn't give them any direction, there's no social worker. So she really started looking at attitude and changes. And that, I think, was the strongest part. And she started going into this issue of social signaling. And that, if your friend who you can relate to, not the pastor, not the executive director, if they start doing something, you get interested. And what the families have talked about, and they interviewed all the families, is that once they were in an environment where their friends, like you and I, we surrounded with our godparents and whatever, you're all striving, and that's what's driving it. All of a sudden, you start doing better in small steps. But if what you're in is a program that looks at you as needy, and everybody's needy, and in many ways you're competing to be more needy because that's how you get more resources, it really kills you. And it could be the same families that are going through those programs are being discouraged. We were working with the same families, so we get a lot of, well, you're creaming. The fact is that these are the same families that used to come through my social services. The whole reason I left that thing is like, these are the same families that were stuck. And now they're actually making progress, but they're not going far enough. And so that's why we really need you guys and everything else. So the median income of the families we're working with is $25,000, basically around poverty level, right? A 23 or 25% jump means they went from 25,000 to about 30,000. They went from here to here. Look at this gap. It's a huge gap. So we get all this recognition because income jumped 20%. I'm over there. Guess I like it, but that's bullshit. It's nowhere near enough to support a family of 4, and that's the average size of our families. So if we don't build a system that recognizes initiative and gives the information that these resources need to be available, like for you and I, on the longer term, so that as you build your life, they're available, we're going to fail. And most programs, recidivism programs, oh, we got the guy a job. We're really happy and whatever. Well, the fact is, they got him a job. He had nothing. He's now here. 2 years later, he's going to be gone. So we got to build mobility. If this country can't build mobility, we'll never be able to impact poverty.
And Mauricio, so this is a totally radical vision, clearly, for what social service delivery could look like in this country. If you thought of the next 1, 2, 3 steps that have to be taken in order to progress towards this vision, what would they be?
Okay, so there is a business plan in terms of us. Okay, I mean, obviously, what we want is we want partners and we want other people that are in powerful, influential positions that can carry the same message. There's enough of us that believe that these families aren't dependent, that they do work hard, they cut our lawns, they're doing our rooms, that we need to say, no, they really are productive, and we need to find metrics that will allow us to find out who's reliable, because most are reliable, but yes, I don't give my nephew just money for nothing. So I feel like one is forming, and that's what I was saying is like join us, not in terms of FII, but in terms of the message, and help us. Like you said, there are ways of conveying this that I don't think that we're that great at, who are consultants, that kind of stuff. The other thing is that, we're replatforming everything, and I think that data is the biggest driver. What we're going to do is we're going to allow the data system that we're using, the data management system, allows us to segment it. So besides our families, we have like a housing developer that has 10,000 households. He wants to enroll his households so he can collect some of this data. And he knows that they have to lie to him, otherwise they lose their housing. So he says, but he's really great. He wants them to move up and out and stuff. Many of the rules we have are really bad, right? But families trust us, so that data is confidential and whatever. So we are actually setting up a platform that programs like one of my board members, Michelle, wants me to go to Save the Children. Anyway, so there's these huge programs that the largest nonprofit in Texas wants, they want to use our system. So if we start getting thousands of families and we get some of this data collected in the same way, because the problem with nonprofits, they don't collect it the same way. So we have 15 years of collecting data and it's clean. So if we can get them to collect some of the indicators in the same way, all of a sudden and you get the consumer feedback, then we start getting to be more powerful. Then the third thing is communications. So we're trying to bring in communications people to take this message of, no, you're looking at this population wrong. Walmart knows that they have money. Walmart is trying to get that money. And there are big firms that now are going to start doing what we are doing. I heard somebody from the White House was telling me that in England there's a company, they're not coming to the US yet because they know they'll be attacked, that is going to start paying families to get this kind of data so that they can develop products to get more of that money out of them, right? So we know that it's being recognized that 100 million people, there's something there. And so the communications piece, I think, for us is also really big.
So 2 questions. How have your former colleagues reacted to this, 1? And 2, what about government more broadly? So recognized by Clinton, MacArthur, whatever else, great. But I'm sure you would say that, what are they doing to change the system? And what can they do? And are they prepared to take that risk? Or is there so much entrenched interest that the system's basically broken?
Okay, really, really great questions, because those are the ones that we're looking at. And the easy one is my former colleagues in social services don't like my model, but they only don't like it because their funders don't like it. See, nonprofits will do whatever the funders tell them to do. I'm on the board of a health foundation. All of a sudden, every nonprofit has a health program. Whether it's job training or whatever, they just put health indicators in it. So, the funders and whoever has the money is what drives it. So the issue for us is we don't actually interact with nonprofits a whole lot. We interact at this level, Clara's level, somebody from the White House. That's the kind of, if we can change funding streams, that the funder says, look, I want feedback from the families. I want that data, and I want it clean. Then the nonprofits are going to have to react to that. Right? The second question, there's very entrenched interests, and there's a lot of jobs at stake, because I've fired 4 people already that couldn't help but be helpful. And it's hard because these are really great people. It's just that, and like I said, a lot of people are leaving private sector to try to do good. And yet it adds to the stereotype that you can't do it yourself. So it's a huge problem for us. But when you start talking to the younger generation, they're actually more willing to be there for the family when the family is doing something, as opposed to their using their social position. So I feel like in this next generation, we're trying to cultivate the youth in the families, and that what we're really looking more is that the numbers you saw were with no systems and no policy change, right? There was no change in it, and yet we got a 20-some% jump, and we got businesses started. They start pooling money. So a lot can be done without changing systems because they're working at a granular level. Now the issue is, can we get them those little bits, because they don't need anywhere near as much money as I spend on my staff. So more of what we're doing is more movement building. We're trying to have families, any other project, and I've talked to, Claire's on my board. And what we're going to be talking about is that we're going to do more training of families, so that if a city wants us to come in, we're not necessarily going to go in. We're going to send our families there and have our families talk to the families there. And so if they want FII, they're going to have to take the families. So we're going to set up the families to try to do more of that. And then on the peer-to-peer level, it just goes so much easier. Long answers. Sorry.
We have time for one more question if there is one.
Well, do you take money from government?
Right now, no. Not that we wouldn't if they gave us, free rein with it. We have trouble with categorical money until we get to a much bigger scale. So when we're at tens of thousands of families, we can take housing money, et cetera, et cetera. Right now, we're so small. We're tracking about 2,000 people right now. It's not big enough to take too much categorical money. Otherwise, it's going to drive you to spend that money. And we don't want to spend money just because it's there. We want it to be demand-driven. So we're just starting to do the analysis to see where are the pots that need to be filled to meet demand so these people don't hit these walls. There is one set of money, of tobacco money, that's going through Alameda County Health, but no, government money, not yet.
Can I ask one other question on collaboration? So if you look at something like what Elise Cherry's doing at Boston Community Capital on the, I don't know whether you're aware of taking the foreclosed properties from the banks and then making them affordable at a price that families can actually afford. Have you thought about collaborating with somebody like that so that they can see it not just from the financial engineering point of view, which is basically what it is, to something that's actually more important? Because a lot of money, a lot of high net worth individuals are interested in that because it does give a 3 or 4% return to them.
We take on, like a partnership on an issue if what it does is it gives us an example as to how other systems could change, how taking this kind of data information would then drive other systems. In other words, we don't do it, we're not a program per se that this is what we're trying to, we don't plan on centralizing any of this, but we demonstrate. So in the housing piece, we are probably going to work with this one housing developer, I think I mentioned, and because he wants to impact people moving up and out and the policies that are holding his families back from doing that. So it'll again demonstrate in a very strict regulated way about affordable housing how that could be changed so actually we could not invest more money in but have people move up and out. So we'll do it in those kinds of situations.
I just have a quick comment on that because the Heron Foundation is an investor in the Boston Community Capital program. I think it's wonderful. It imparts the idea that owning a home is the goal. Yeah. The beauty of this is that it's kind of neutral.
Absolutely.
Right. So yes, it might be something that is helpful, right, but it's a program to do something as opposed to this is a little different.
Yep, got it. But sometimes using that sort of source and making them change, leading them to understand.
I think Maurice's point about the federal government is so important. It's when you get big enough, so you're not driven by one, buyer, as it were. You then get to be able to offer the folks in the program choice. They can decide what they want.
Control, choice, community. That's our definition of really getting out of poverty. Give families as much control and choice. And, again, promote community, promote helping one another, which our country doesn't do very well.
So can I ask a really controversial question?
Sure.
So do you think that actually the system, our culture wants this to happen?
People ask me, what would you do about childcare? What would you do about this? I don't know. We've done this work because we just sort of believed in families, and we just did it, right? We weren't big, we weren't heavily funded. It's just, my mother would do this. My family, the families I knew, would take advantage of this, and that's the way we're going to proceed. I don't think that we analyze this whole thing and try to have it influence what we do. It's like, what we're doing is like, this can scale. Social media, journaling, data, information, that's huge. We have a system that now will incorporate a lot of other folks. We'll learn a lot. That's what we're going to do. And we just, people are going to have to respond to us because we have metrics, and you compare your metrics against us, and you can, compare cost benefit against us because we don't have a lot of staff, we'll win. And people will have to deal with this. Sorry. Okay.
With that, why don't we wrap?
Yeah, you poor guys. Thank you.